Namaste and welcome to Ruma TV. Today we are going to discuss about approach to diagnosis and treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis is one of the most commonest autoimmune disorders that are encountered in everyday clinical practice. Therefore, diagnosing it early and initiating good treatment might be the difference between patients who have good disease control, disease being in remission with hardly any deformities, and development of a multi-system organ involvement. While the other end of the spectrum is people who have deformities, have chronic disease with many flares and relapses, and with development and recruitment of more and more organs in the disease process. So let's move about rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, as we already mentioned, is an autoimmune disorder. It is progressive, it is disabling, and it is multisystem. That means it can involve the musculoskeletal system, but there can be other involvement like lung, heart, um, eyes, etc. Skin can be involved. It causes premature mortality and morbidity, disability, and a compromised quality of life. Pathologically, this is the normal joint structure, wherein in rheumatoid, what happens is due to various factors or amalgamation of various factors, there is recruitment of dysregulated inflammatory cells in the lining of the synovium that causes formation of there is hyperplastic synovial membrane and neovascularization that leads to a formation of pannus, and this pannus further leads to destruction of the cartilage and the underlying joint surfaces, which if left untreated can go on to development of joint deformities. Epidemiologically, worldwide there is a prevalence of 0.8%, while in India it is 0.7. It is known to be 2 or 3 times more common in women than men, and it can occur at any age actually, but is more common between the ages of 30 and 50. When the age of onset of rheumatoid symptoms is before the 16th birthday of a child, it is known as a juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. What are the clinical features? Now, arthritis is the main symptom of rheumatoid arthritis, which I'll come to about later. There are extra articular manifestations, like I already mentioned, such as the involvement of eye in the form of iritis or scleritis, or there can be uveitis, involvement of the skin in the form of vasculitic rash or ulcers, etc., and rheumatoid nodules, involvement of the lung leading to ILD, which can cause dyspnea on exertion, dyspnea at rest, and dry cough, and sicca symptoms involving the eye, the lacrimal glands, the salivary glands, leading to keratoconjunctivitis sicca or even xerostomia. Constitutional features such as malaise, fatigue, low-grade fever, and weight loss are very common. Now, what is arthritis exactly? So, in rheumatoid arthritis, patient basically has small joint involvement more than large joint involvement, though it is not a rule. This is the most commonest presentation of rheumatoid. There is development of pain, there is swelling in the involved joint, and there is stiffness, especially after a period of inactivity, which is lasting for more than 30 to 45 minutes. Ideally, it is usually more than 1 hour, but anything that is lasting more than 30 minutes is usually pathological. It aggravates with rest, which I already said that pain, swelling, and stiffness usually get worse after a period of inactivity. So it is aggravated with rest and it is relieved by activity. It is usually bilaterally symmetrical and it is additive. That is, when we used to talk about rheumatic fever, we used to say that the joint pains are migratory. That is, it moves on from one joint to another without causing any damage to the joint that was previously involved. But rheumatoid arthritis is not like that. It is an additive pattern. That is, though it may start with the involvement of small joints of the hands, it may eventually involve the elbow, the shoulder, the knees, and all of them are present at the same time in many patients. If not treated at this stage, there may be development of deformity. So this picture basically shows us all the deformities that we have commonly heard of, the Boutonniere's deformity of the thumb. There may be swan neck deformity or ulnar deviation of the metacarpophalangeal joints causing windswept deformity that can occur mostly in toes also. There is relative sparing of the thoracic and lumbar joints, which is seen. There is relative sparing of the spinal joints, but cervical spine may be commonly involved. So how we can differentiate rheumatoid arthritis based on onset? There is an acute onset which occurs within days to weeks, and which it can be abrupt and explosive in nature. That is, the patient may develop pains overnight, and there may be involvement of multiple joints over a small period of time. The second one is subacute, which is the commonest that we see. It can occur over weeks to months, and it is gradual and insidious in onset. So this is the one that has commonly that additive pattern where initially there is involvement of some joints and thereon there is addition of other joints. The last one is palindromic, which is a transient self-limited episode of mono or polyarthritis lasting for days to week, and later on the patient may not have joint pains for many months. It is quite difficult to diagnose unless there is classical history and there is a good amount of biochemistry backing our diagnosis, but it is quite common and is more commonly seen in men who are work hard. The types are polyarticular disease, which is a classical in nature. So there is involvement of the small joints and then of the large joints. So both can be present at the same time. While monoarthritis is less common in rheumatoid, first and foremost, I think we should basically exclude more commoner causes of monoarthritis such as gout, infectious arthritis, including septic arthritis and spondyloarthropathies, and maybe then diagnose rheumatoid. Examination wise, what do we do? So we look for joint line tenderness. When we come to musculoskeletal examination, that is, look for joint line tenderness of each and every joint, which are most commonly involved. Metacarpal squeeze is one of the pathognomonic tests. When you squeeze the metacarpal, the patient winces. So this is a classical test that we can do very easily in the OP. Look for any active synovitis or synovial hypertrophy that can give rise to a gummy feeling of the joints. There might be presence of joint effusions, which can be actually easily seen in knee joint involvement. Look for the range of movement, especially of the shoulder and hip, because we cannot really discern joint line tenderness or any synovitis or presence of synovial joint effusion. Checking the range of movement is more important in shoulders and hip, and presence or absence of any deformity. Systematically, we have to look for any anemia, presence of any lymph nodes, look at the oral cavity to see if there is any xerostomia or general dental health, respiratory system to see if there is any additional ILD-like features. So this coarse Velcro crackles at the bottom of the lung is something that we need to look for. Skin and eyes is something that we can look for and ask also. Concomitantly, we need to ask for these extra-articular involvement as well. The routine investigations are when a patient with rheumatoid arthritis walks into our OP, the routine investigations we ask for is complete blood counts, liver function test, renal function test, and we can ask for urine routine. In females, please do ask for urine pregnancy test and viral markers, which include HIV, HBsAg, and HCV, and ESR and CRP. So this baseline gives us many inputs about the presence or absence of a concomitant viral infection. Hepatitis B positivity, hepatitis C positivity can be related with false positive rheumatoid factor positivity as well. Therefore, that is very important that we cover it in the beginning. And moreover, for later on, we need these viral markers so as to initiate the treatment. Baseline LFTs and creatinine is very important before we can initiate DMRs in any patient. And ESR and CRP gives us the inflammatory burden of disease in each and every patient, and how strong and how hard we need to hit the rheumatoid arthritis per se with our treatment. So the other not next, a part of the entire panel is to do rheumatoid factor. It is done commonly by nephelometry or ELISA, and it may be detectable in about only 75 to 85% of patients. It is 69% sensitive and 85% specific. The very low titer positivity can be seen in patients who are elderly. They have hepatitis C and B positivity, like I already mentioned, who have bacterial endocarditis, cryoglobulinemias, primary biliary cirrhosis, and other rheumatological diseases as well. Very high titers of rheumatoid factor indicate that the disease is going to be aggressive. There might be destruction of joint, and there may be presence of extra articular complications as well. Though rheumatoid factor is of help in diagnosis, it is of no value in giving prognostic picture. So many of our patients keep trying to do rheumatoid factor serially and say that, oh, my rheumatoid factor is decreasing or my rheumatoid factor has become negative, so maybe I should stop treatment. This is wrong and this is a myth. So there is absolutely no point in doing repeated rheumatoid factors over a period of time. If required, it can be probably done annually, but otherwise it's not recommended. Anti-CCP. So anti-citrullinated peptide antibodies are antibodies against the citrullinated residues of certain proteins. It is a test that has massively helped us in diagnosing rheumatoid arthritis in that 25% of patients who are missed out. So this is done by ELISA. It is highly specific. It is about 96% specific and but has a sensitivity of only about 70%. So it may also be present in a patient 10 years prior to the diagnosis of RA itself. In high titers, it indicates that the joint disease is going to be erosive and there might be radiological joint destruction. So anti-CCP helps us in patients who are rheumatoid factor positive and in prognostication of the disease as well. It's a slightly expensive test, but it's worth doing at the onset of the treatment itself, so that we can be lucid with the patient about how we are going to treat the patient. We sometimes like to do ANA when there are extra articular involvement in certain patients, like there is an eye involvement or skin involvement. Doing ANA, that is anti-nuclear antibodies, is also important to see if there is a added connective tissue disorder. Like this could be a part of overlap disorder, or this could be a part of lupus where rheumatoid and lupus is present together. So it is important sometimes that we do ANA as well. Radiology is a must. Usually we prefer the x-ray of hands, feet and wrists. Should be obtained at baseline and can be repeated periodically to see assess for any additional damage and for treatment effectiveness, but also to assess the amount of osteopenia or osteoporosis that is present. The earliest change that we can see on x-ray sometimes is called a periarticular osteopenia. Just around the surfaces of the joint surfaces there might be osteopenia. There might be juxta-articular bony erosions, which can probably be seen in early stages much better with MRI than with just X-rays. There is symmetrical joint space narrowing, and eventually there is loss of this joint space. Erosions begin at the bare area of the joints, but not the surface that is covered by the cartilage. And later on, with development of chronic disease, X-rays might show subluxation or complete loss of joint alignment as well, with multiple erosions or eaten up bones actually. If you see this X-ray here, so as you can see, there is a lot of juxta-articular osteopenia over here, and there is in this particular joint, you can see that there is loss of articular surface and space, and there are development of these black bubbles. These are the erosions that are present over here. So also in the wrist, we can see that multiple carpal bones have been involved, and there is a lot of loss of joint spaces with development of erosions. I think this is another joint that is showing a very good erosion over here. It looks like it has been eaten up. So these changes are quite progressed and they are very chronic. So in such a patient, actually you don't even need an X-ray to really diagnose that this is rheumatoid, because outwardly the patient will already have some deformities. You can see that this patient has already this second phalanx that has already got deformed. So this is just to show that the changes that occur early on. There is a slight catch. Basically, when there is both rheumatoid factor and anti-CCP that is negative, and X-ray is not really saying anything, the patient has come on with very early manifestations of rheumatoid. MRI of select joints also can be done, because MRI catches these changes much earlier. And also a new developing tool is ultrasound of the musculoskeletal system that can be definitely used to diagnose rheumatoid early on. Coming to the extra-articular manifestations, so there are many constitutional features such as malaise, fatigue, weight loss, loss of appetite, hair loss, listlessness, etc. Hematologically, there can be presence of anemia and Felty syndrome, that is association with splenomegaly, and there can sometimes be rarely lymphomas also. So it is important that we keep doing serial complete blood counts. I, in the form of sicca, there can be keratoconjunctivitis sicca, there can be presence of scleritis, and in very, very rare, untreated, um, ignored cases, there can be keratomalacia perforans, which is a deadly complication to have. Lungs, commonly there can be pleuritis, pleural effusions, BOOP and ILD, and nodules can be present in the lung as well. Skin may have, again, there might be sicca symptoms, there can be vasculitis and rheumatoid nodules, and sometimes very chronic ulcers that are difficult to heal. In CVS, which is the most cardiovascular system involvement, is the most commonest cause of mortality in patients with rheumatoid, which is because of the inflammatory burden that it imposes on the cardiovascular system. So MI is the commonest cause of death in rheumatoid patients. So that is an indirect way of involvement of the cardiovascular system. But apart from that, patients can have pericarditis because of rheumatoid itself. How do we diagnose rheumatoid arthritis? So the older criteria, the 1987 one, which is what I learned when I was in MBBS, was if the patient must have 1 to 4, and this must have been present for at least 6 weeks. So any patient who is having more than 4 out of these 7 criteria was labeled as RA. So the patient must have morning stiffness that is lasting for at least an hour, arthritis of 3 joint simultaneously with presence of synovitis as observed by the physician, arthritis of the hand joints, that is either wrist, MCP or PIP joint involvement was a must, and symmetric arthritis, that is at bilaterally symmetrical involvement in arthritis, presence of rheumatoid nodules, positive rheumatoid factor, and typical radiological changes. Now, the problem with this criteria is that you have already seen that involvement of hand joints is not always present in all patients of rheumatoid. So easily, if a patient has monoarthritis of the knee, easily this criteria is gone. It may not be symmetric if the patient again has monoarthritis. If rheumatoid nodules are not present in all patients, and serum rheumatoid factor, like I already said, is only sensitive in about 69 and specific in about 75% of the patients. So that big chunk of patients who are rheumatoid negative, factor negative, that is, can be missed by this criteria. So a newer criteria was made, which is known as the ACR EULAR 2010 criteria. So development of a score of more than 6 is called as definitive RA, and this is the scoring system for it. It is based on a score. So joint distribution, one large joint is given a score of 0. So involvement of 2 to 10 large joints or is score of 1. 1 to 3 small joints where large joints are not counted is given a score of 2. 4 to 10 small joints, again large joints are not counted, given a score of 3. Presence of more than 10 joints, at least one small joint, is given a score of 5. So this is the highest score here. Serologically, in this criteria, anti-CCP was included. So low positive rheumatoid or low positive ACPA was given a score of 2 directly, and high positive titers, that was given a score of 3. Symptom duration. So anything less than 6 weeks was given a score of 0. Anything more than 6 weeks was given a score of 0. 1. Acute phase reactance. This was also new. So we have a lot of patients who are anti-CCP rheumatoid factor negative, both negative, but have alarmingly high ESR and CRP. So those patients found some place in this criteria. So normal CRP and ESR get a score of 0. Abnormal ESR or CRP get a score of 1. So technically, if we take a patient who has, say, involvement of knee, monoarthritis of the knee for more than 6 weeks and has high positive rheumatoid factor and abnormally high ESR and CRP. So if we are going to score this person, it's going to come somewhere near one large joint is 0, high titer positive is 3, lasting for more than 6 weeks is 4, and then abnormally high ESR and CRP is 5. So this patient has a score of 5. So he is not a definite RA, but he could be a probable RA. So still you can keep this patient on follow-up or you can decide to initiate based on the symptoms and see how he goes on over the next few days. Of course, other causes of monoarthritis have to be ruled out. So any like here, any patient who has a score of less, patient might fulfill the criteria over a period of time, or retrospectively we can see that maybe more joints got involved later. So here we have a few case scenarios. So this is a 35-year-old female who had weight loss and stiffness. So constitutional symptoms were more. There was pain, but there was very less swelling. So when this lady was evaluated, she was found to be rheumatoid factor and ACPA negative. ESR and CRP was normal, and X-ray was also normal. But later on, she was thoroughly examined and found that she had an hypopigmented lesion over the forearm, and slit skin smears later showed lepromatous leprosy. So what we should always keep in mind is that presence of joint pain and joint swelling and stiffness does not mean that the patient has rheumatoid arthritis. There are many other causes of arthritis, and some of them are systemic diseases such as leprosy, which is very common in India actually. So it is a must to rule out illnesses like lepromatous leprosy, or even TB sometimes, to not make a disaster of starting immunosuppressants in such patients. The next patient is a 17-year-old female who had weight loss, fatigue, she was apathic, and she was pale, had mild splenomegaly and cervical lymph node. This girl, when she came to the OPD, looked extremely listless, looks like she's just about to fall down, looks toxic. So you know that the look itself is not very enthusiastic, rather, for a rheumatologist, because we know probably this is leaning towards a malignancy. So in that case, direct your investigations in ruling out the malignancy. So the ESR was 110, CRP 45, HB was 7, platelet 73,000, TC is 3,300, rheumatoid factor was negative, ACPA negative, ANA was 1 plus. So at this juncture, I really thought maybe it could be some kind of a connective tissue disorder as well, because ESRs are high, platelet, she has pancytopenia, so maybe there could be something. So I sent for an ANA profile as well, and ANA profile came out to be positive. ANA profile came out to be negative, but I had concomitantly sent for peripheral smears which showed multiple blasts, and a bone marrow was done later which showed that the patient had ALL. So uh, the first look of the patient is very important in judging too, that if the patient is very sick, look for more heinous causes of arthritis as well, because these patients can also have joint pains. This is of a 63-year-old male who came to me with a predominant involvement of large joints, that is of knees and shoulders, and had significant weight loss over last 3 months with anemia and was a chronic smoker. He additionally gave me complaints on inquiry of urinary urgency and occasional hematuria. So when generally I see patients who are males over the age of 60, I usually ask for concomitant presence of any benign prostatic hyperplasia symptoms, that is urinary hesitancy, frequency, etc., and also if they are on treatment for it. So this gentleman had urinary urgency, and occasionally he said that he has hematuria. So that should ring some bells. So in elderly males who are smokers who have symptoms of BPH, please additionally get a prostate specific antigen also done for these patients. So on basic evaluation, again his ESR CRP was high, but the rest of the things looked okay except for some small hemoglobin drop. But the PSA turned out to be more than 100 units, and imaging showed that the patient had CA prostate. The patient underwent surgery, and after surgery, most of his joint symptoms totally disappeared. The other patient is a 45-year-old male who was a smoker, was relatively healthy, and had only two joint involvement. He had most of his investigations were normal except for a high rheumatoid factor of 150. ACPA was negative, and X-ray showed some juxta-articular osteopenia, but there were absolutely no erosions. He was, of course, I labeled him as rheumatoid arthritis, but later on and started him on HCQS and methotrexate. But after about 2 or 3 months of initiation of therapy, the patient suddenly developed psoriasis. So sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes we don't know if this is rheumatoid arthritis with psoriasis, which has been precipitated like by some drugs, like maybe HCQS, or was it psoriatic arthritis to begin with? Because some patients may have arthritis prior to the involvement of the skin itself. So keep a watch on such patients because your treatment will have some minute differences in each arthritis. So coming to the treatment, the goal is to stop inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis. So by stopping of inflammation, we would be relieving the symptoms, preventing joint and organ damage, improving function overall, physical as well as general well-being, and reducing the long-term complications of rheumatoid as such. So by stopping inflammation, we are trying to attain remission. Remission is a disease-free state. While the patient is maybe on drugs or may have stopped it, the patient is doing well with absolutely no joint pains, and his biochemistry, that is his ESR, CRP, etc., are all normal. So by treating aggressively, we are trying to induce the patient into a state of remission. How do we do this? The strategy is to start early as possible. At diagnosis is what commonly is implemented. Be aggressive, that is, use more than 1 or 2 DMRs to achieve the remission. Targeting remissions, that is, treat to target. So do not stop until you know that the patient's symptoms are completely relieved and that his biochemistry also is improving under your treatment, and achieve tight control as to prevent the number of flares and thereon prevent the further damage that is occurring on the joints. So at the establishment of diagnosis, assess the baseline disease activity. So this is important to know how much improvement we have achieved over a period of time, or how much we are not improving, so as to change therapy, and assess the damage that is already present. Now, once you have estimated that, initial treatment is to start NSAIDs just to relieve pain, DMRs as per severity, and local and systemic steroids may be considered to alleviate pain because they act well and they prevent joint damage to a certain extent when used well. Now, if the patient has good response to this, continue that line of treatment. If there is no response, then add a second DMR. So commonly at this stage itself, we would have added methotrexate. So if you have not already added that, add methotrexate and see. Parenteral methotrexate may be used, if not oral methotrexate, or any other DMR may be additionally added. If there is response at this stage, continue again. If, however, with the use of multiple DMRs, the patient is not responding to treatment, then do consider biologics. There are many newer biologics that have come. I'm going to touch upon them in a while. So, biologics may be considered in such patients. So what are the conventional synthetic DMRs that we are commonly using is hydroxychloroquine, methotrexate, leflunomide, and sulfasalazine. So these four are the common disease modifying drugs that we initiate the patient on initially, monitor and see how they are doing. So if we find that the patient is not responding to a certain line of treatment within about 10 to 12 weeks of treatment as well, then it is better to consider some other line of drugs. So less commonly we use tacrolimus, azathioprine, mycophenolate mofetil, and even cyclosporin is sometimes used. A newer targeted synthetic DMR is called JAK inhibitor, which is tofacitinib. It's a good drug, and it is available easily now. So if the patient is not really responding to first line of synthetic DMRs, uh, it can be considered. We can consider to add tofa as well. The biosimilars and the biologics are the biological drugs that are available in rheumatoid. So we have targeted anti-TNFs such as etanercept, adalimumab, infliximab, golimumab, which are good. They alleviate pain and symptoms rapidly, and joint damage can be stopped in patients with rheumatoid. We have anti-B cell therapy, which is called as rituximab, which is given as an IV infusion, and certain other molecules such as abatacept and tocilizumab may also be used, but they are used less commonly. So monitoring therapy is commonest side effects have been mentioned here, and how we monitor them and how to go about them. So hydroxychloroquine is one of the commonest drugs that we use, and it can cause fair amount of skin pigmentation and acne, and if it is very bothersome to the patient, then it is advised to be stopped. Visual disturbances are a well-known complication, especially the most notorious one is to be the bullous maculopathy. So eye checkup at baseline and annually thereafter is recommended. In patients with JRA, in children especially, initiating HCQS has to be considered with along with the pediatrician and an ophthalmologist, and checkups have to be more frequent in children because they cannot really report visual disturbances. Sulfasalazine can cause rash because it has a sulfur component. Allergy is very common. Therefore, at initiation itself, give them smaller doses, see if they can tolerate the drug, and only then escalate the dose. Nausea, vomiting, and myelosuppression and hepatotoxicity is known. Therefore, this needs just regular blood checkup with our other, as and when the patient comes for follow-up, we do a panel of tests to monitor disease activity, and in the same panel, we can see if they have any toxicity to the drugs as well. The other thing that sulfasalazine causes is reversible oligospermatozoa, which is can cause some amount of reversible infertility in males. Therefore, if it is a problem, it can be stopped for a while, or some other medicine can also be considered. Methotrexate commonly causes mouth ulcers, hair loss, myelosuppression, hepatotoxicity, and pulmonary toxicity. So it is a must to do regular blood checkups. Leflunomide causes a lot of GI intolerance, can cause abdominal bloating, discomfort, diarrhea. If the patient is losing a lot of weight, is not able to eat, and has diarrhea very commonly, it is better to just stop the drug. It can cause a hike in blood pressure in certain patients. Such patients may have had no hypertension at the onset and later may develop hypertension, or patients already on medications find that their blood pressure is not controlled by their previous medications in any way. So if blood pressure medications can be hiked and the blood pressure brought under control, then that would be great. But if not, then maybe leflunomide needs to be stopped. Regular blood checkup to monitor leflunomide is also enough. Azathioprine can cause myelosuppression, hepatotoxicity, and that also needs regular blood check. So there are various measures of disease activity that is commonly used in various rheumatological clinics, but mostly these are used for the purpose of research and drug trials. So there are about six activity measures. There can be this is a disease activity index, that is the composite disease activity index. There is a DAS score, that is disease activity score, which counts the 28 joints. There is a DAS ESR, which utilizes ESR in its calculation, and there's a CRP one, which utilizes CRP in its calculation. And there are some others that are mentioned over here. The most common is that one we use daily in clinical in our clinics, outpatient clinics, is probably DAS scores along with HAQ. Apart from general treatment, exercise is extremely important in all patients with arthritis, so also in rheumatoid. Of course, like our tin man here, the patient might feel stiff and very unmotivated to start exercise, to initiate exercise, because sometimes, unfortunately, when the patient initiates exercises, also they may have flares of arthritis, and that can bring down their morale further about exercising. So give them some time. Once the treatment starts, let them get better, but do insist on exercise, because exercise itself acts as a great anti-rheumatic drug, and it can bring about great joint motility and mobility, prevent further damage, reduce disease activity, increase the feeling of well-being, and basically such patients also respond to treatment great and have lesser side effects to drugs as well. So insist that the patient do some form of exercise, do it slowly, but do it steadily. With that, we come to the end of discussion about rheumatoid arthritis. Thank you for your patient listening, and I hope you see more and more cases of rheumatoid arthritis in your clinics. Learn to recognize it, learn to start treatment at least at the basic level and monitor drug therapy, and to monitor the patient's progress as well. Thank you.